Well, Steve, I think we're about 6 minutes in. I see Jennifer has joined. Um,
Yeah, sorry, I was doing a rush email for Nathan that I had to get out.
no worries, but glad you can make it. Steve was commenting early on. He's like, yeah, she has amazingly made every one of our meetings, which is commendable with all the travels and stuff you do. So, uh,
You
um,
stay
Well,
busy.
you guys are a pretty self-sufficient committee, so I'm very proud to be your coach.
well, I think pending any guidance or overhead, and please jump in, Steve. But I think really this is kind of our last main meeting before we hit the 30 June deadline for this draft, and then of course the 15 July meeting there in Salisbury. So our focus is really going to be on where we are with the draft report. We've made actually quite a bit of progress across the committee over the last week or two. And so, kind of walk through some of our gap areas and kind of tell the group where we are, and then sort of leave with our plan for the 15th July meeting, which is really to have a PowerPoint version, kind of the highlights of our draft report that we're going to provide for the larger group. So I'm going to start by um, where is my share button? Oh, there it is. I switched through three different meeting forums throughout the day between, MS Teams, WebEx, and now this. And so it's a little bit different every one. So
I know, let's just have one, right?
yeah, exactly. If we could get everyone just to get on one. So can everybody see my Chrome and see the document? I hope it's a decent size, but I think you can
Yep.
increase your screen. So,
Yep.
real quickly, kind of walk through the framework of the document. So, up front, we changed the order a little bit to kind of be a little better of a story. So, up front, we have our exec summary. And right now, Steve and I worked an outline. And so, we think we've got the main pieces for the executive summary, really starting with kind of voter concerns. And we've narrowed it down to three main ones on understanding digital security in depth, confidence in ballot chain of custody, and then transparency and voter list maintenance. And so they cover sort of the big, and then from those concerns, we jump to recommendations on things that we believe we can go back to, whether it's the Carter Center or our own North Carolina legislature and say, look, here's some recommendations. And currently, we have two main ones, which is to increase the public's knowledge of how work when it comes to elections, and you can do that. And then, kind of one of the things that we believe can always be increased is understanding the risks to our cybersecurity ballot infrastructure. And the way you do that is by doing more and constant auditing of the system pre-election, during the election, and post. And so that's always going to be a comeback. And so what we've done with this outline, we think it's in a pretty good place. Is really the last thing to do is turn this outline into a couple of small paragraphs that are really just the tip of the iceberg on what we think our key takeaways are. And then as you go through the report, you will get much more in detail into what our concerns are and our recommendations. So that's the exec sum up front. Then we do a short. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Could I add one thing here? As I'm looking at the committee recommendations, again, a couple of things occurred to me. One is the point on audits. Uh, we can tie that into our area later on funding, because one of the things with audits is it's a trade-off, right? The more extensive your audits are, the more expensive it is. And so by putting something in there about that this would be a good investment for North Carolina to make, we tie those two things together. The other thing that I would mention is that producing materials and infographics is a great idea. I have zero talent in that, so we'd have to figure out how to do that.
Yep, I hear you, Steve. But no, I think those are great points. I mean, one of the concerns that have been at each of the town halls that I've seen so far is talking about money and funding. And there's always a limited budget, but this is an area where that those limits really have an impact, and it's not cheap to secure our infrastructure. So that's a great point, Steve. Once we get past the exec sum, we kind of do a short bit on methodology and just kind of how we went about gathering the data, focusing our topics. And then of course, our meeting schedule, which is really how we did the work that the committee does. And so we've got that all laid out, as well as the topics that we've talked about in each of our meetings so far. And then we finish out the methodology with really a short bit on what kind of really focused us, which is how North Carolina does its elections when it comes to cybersecurity and securing everything from ballots to our equipment. And so we've got call outs from the general statute, as well as some summary points from the State Board of Elections website, and really what drives them on security. And then we go from methodology into the findings portion of the report. We still have a gap here up front. Kind of an unknown right now is kind of where that survey stands. We submitted our questions, did all that, but not really sure on what the next step is on how we get the feedback that comes out of that survey. But whenever that comes in, that will go here as a North Carolina focused voter concerns. And so once we get that, we'll add that in. But my assumption is that those concerns are going to align fairly well with what we're gleaning from kind of part 2 of findings, which is what we've gotten from the election tour, from the town halls. And so we've broken that town hall feedback into 5 broad areas. And they've been the same that they've been for the last month or so, so no big change there. The change is that at least 3 of them have actually, we're getting pretty close to completing 3 of those feedback areas on the concern, and then the longer discussion of those areas. So we've got our first one is on basic cybersecurity knowledge. And so I'll let people at their leisure kind of go through, read that. Number 2 was on election equipment knowledge, so just understanding how equipment works. Number 3 concern area was on understanding the ballot process, kind of the life of the ballot from a technology standpoint, and then how they're secured. And then 4 and 5, again, 4 was funding, so we'll have a bit to put out there. And then the last one was on voter list accuracy from a technology standpoint. So still a little bit of work to build out those findings areas, but that's really the major portion of the paper. And then we end with our sort of bibliography sources that people can go to, kind of our resources cited, where they can see where we got all of our information from. So I will pause there. Steve, if I've missed anything or gone too fast or something you want to expound on, please do. If not, then I'll kind of push it back out to the group. Our plan is to kind of tidy this up here over the next 2 weeks. And then wherever we get to, we think we'll have a pretty good product by June 30th. We have a suspense to submit that back to the larger committee heads to kind of put in with the other committees. And then between the 30th of June and the 15th July, I'll be working with Steve to kind of build this into a summarized PowerPoint presentation that we'll present on the 15th to the larger group. So that's kind of our plan. And this is what we have so far. So I will turn it back over to Steve or Jennifer, or any questions from the group.
Yeah, I think you did a great job, James, and I want to make sure to put a big acknowledgement out there that those first 2 areas with the discussion were written entirely by James, and they're outstanding. I had notes of things to include, and when I got around to looking at it, to thinking, is there anything I want to add to this, or I didn't find a single thing. I thought it was outstanding. So James, great work on that.
I appreciate that. I won't take all the credit, and I've linked in my citations in there liberally, and so really the credit goes to our North Carolina State Board of Elections, because a lot of those were kind of paraphrased from a lot of their resources. So again, I think actually our state board does a great job. It's sometimes I don't think people know where the information is. And so really, I think you'll see the recommendation I have is it's a information campaign to help people find where information is stored. You know, whether that's social media, putting stuff out, but the information is out there. You just got to know where to go find it.
So I will add a little bit on the missing public survey. There you go. We do have, I mean, there are national surveys that talk about voter confidence in machines. We do have data from our 2022 tour. And I'm not sure it was a specific question, but you know, I could write, Bob and I noticed that every single meeting, every single town hall, there were skeptics about the equipment and about the digital security. We know that people in general are very distrusting of machines. I mean, you know, there's a reason that the movie Terminator was so wildly popular, and many others. So, you know, I could write a paragraph on the 2022 feedback that we got. We do have one NorthCon, we may have more than one NorthCon specific poll at this point. I can check in with Michael Bitzer. There are some national ones that I can look up real quick and we can point to. We also will get evaluations from the Trusted Election Tour this year, which will end October the 8th, I believe. No, the 15th is the virtual one. It's the last one. So that's going to be later in the fall. We can, you know, indicate that. We'll continue to get public input and feedback. One thing I want to point out, when you go through the law about digital security and about what's required, I think it would help to emphasize it is against the North Carolina law to connect a machine to the internet, because we had so many skeptics who wanted to open up the machine and didn't believe it and said there's still a modem in there. And, you know, that if people knew it was illegal based on our law, I think that would make a difference to a lot of folks. So I know it's in there, but you might want to say, you know, big idea from this. Guess what? It's against the law. So, you know, our
Yep.
election workers are following the law. And the last thing I would say is, did we come, because there was another group discussing Eric, and I can't remember, Rachel, maybe you remember which committee it was, but did the group come to any conclusion? Because I think it was one of the committees thought that Eric had become too partisan. And so my suggestion was, if the committee thinks that having a system of communicating with other states is helpful, you don't have to name it. You just, you know, could say that we you know, we think that communicating with other states to prevent duplicate registration and voting is a good idea. Or you can say the committee didn't decide, you know, didn't have a conclusion. So whatever you think is appropriate there.
That was voter access and registration. We had that conversation with you, Jennifer.
Okay.
And
Thank
then
you.
Myron, yeah, Myron, our chair, actually has been in touch with one of the other committees who also had Eric come up. And I think that he and Myron both decided that they both needed to address it from different perspectives. I think for this group, the voter access and registration decision to raise Eric is from the perspective of helping voters to understand where they are registered, and how that also is a tool to help get eligible but unregistered voters identified. So we did not talk about it from the standpoint of security of those networks. But Jennifer, I do think that we took the advice. We would name it in all its parts. Behind the curtain, we all agree that Eric was a fantastically useful tool, and that the concerns about partisanship were red herring. So we would just name the requirements, and that would, you know, lead to a decision to use an existing system already.
Right. I added a note about Eric on the area 5 way down at the end. I did that probably 10 minutes before we met, so I don't know if James saw that yet. But I think Eric tried to do too much, and they had some things that I think everybody agreed on. And then they kind of pushed, and this is the topic for the other group that Ted was talking about, the voter access. They tried to, they had some pretty aggressive stances on reaching out to unregistered voters and getting people registered. And I think that was seen as politicized by people. I don't think people had a problem with the voter roll maintenance and checking, you know, people voting. But that's my impression of it. I think it did get to be such a hot potato that it's probably best not to make that part of our recommendations, that specific group. Scott has a hand raised. You can add something?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. If you don't mind me, participating here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're coming into the November election, and it's really kind of impractical for any recommendations to be implemented prior to the November election. So my question is, did you guys find anything in current practices that you thought was problematic or was a red flag? Or and this is kind of a leading question, or would one of your recommendations potentially be that people continue to do what they're doing, continue to apply the security principles, to apply the audits, and to do what they're doing because what they're doing works. However, down the road, we want to go from good to better. So let's take a look at some of these other things. So I'll just kind of leave that as a thought for you guys to bolster people's confidence coming into November as to what things are already working and the recommendations be to continue to do them, versus introducing things that couldn't be done prior to November. And unless there's something that you think absolutely is broken and has to be fixed. Couple other comments, and my exposure to this was just getting close to my iPad and squinting at the document here. So I'm not, I won't claim to be terribly informed, but you made some recommendations about increasing audit. I think it would be helpful when you get to that point to be specific. What kind of audits are you talking about? Because saying an audit is kind of like saying double check your work. You know, what is it? What do you mean? At what point in time, what data, and what process should you use to audit your information? So if you could provide some specificity as to what you think are good practices that you'd like to see continued or enhanced, I think that would be helpful. Security, we've since 2016, we've tended to categorize nationally election security as being cybersecurity, but you acknowledge security in depth, which includes personnel security, information security, document security, and most importantly in elections is physical security. So I think the public is a little bit too fixated on the cyber aspects. It doesn't have a full appreciation of the depth of security and the breadth of security practices that are inherent in election practices. So if you could call that out somehow or emphasize the fact that the security threats are not merely cyber. There's a myriad of practices to counteract them. You're better informing people, that outreach, that education, that's always really hard to do. That's part of everybody's job in public service. Do you have any specific suggestions on how to do that, on the topics that you think need to be emphasized, that the public needs more information? that would be helpful to folks. I think if you could say, you know, if you could reach out to people like this on this topic, rather than just generally, you know, help people understand how the whole system works. Also, in terms of the public's perception, and I've got kind of a laundry list in my head here, so I don't mind. I hope you don't mind me just doing a little flow of consciousness here. And these are free opinions, and you're free to do whatever you want, to include ignore them completely. But you know, the public's concerns about elections are just heritage concerns. They're urban legends in a way that I've heard for over 30 years. It's just different actors from different partisan perspectives are repeating the same things. You know, in 1999, when the machines did have modems built into them, people were worried about them being connected to the internet. And they never really, on a widespread basis, ever have been. But those concerns get recycled over and over and over. Like Jennifer said, you know, that the internet being kind of, you know, plugging machines into the internet is being, you know, a classic example. So I wouldn't get, I guess where I'm going with this is I wouldn't get too caught up in waiting for survey results. I think everyone has a good general sense of what the public's concerns are. And they're basically the same ideas that just gain currency among new people every few years. So I wouldn't sweat too much having actually empirical data of a survey to be able to articulate what voters' concerns are. And one last thing, I did have a question from the little bit I could see about list maintenance on there. You know, what is the issue or concern with list maintenance? And whatever it is, I think you should articulate it. And it's probably some combination of, from my experience, is people who aren't eligible to vote are on the list, and people who should be eligible to vote have been taken off the list. Okay, so those are the two different concerns that historically surround list maintenance. So which one of those issues, or are there new issues that you guys see with list maintenance that you want to explore? So, you know, sorry for that long rambling thing, but I didn't take any notes. I don't have a copy of your report here. So I needed to do it before I forgot it all, because I'm of that age. And by the way, I'm a former Army intelligence officer as well. So maybe, Jim, we should compare notes sometime.
Absolutely. No, all those were great comments, Scott, and I agree with each one. I think the areas that you mentioned on voter list maintenance were in our concern, and then also just, you know, people wondering, asking questions about how, you know, what prevents someone from voting, you know, on one place and then crossing the state line and voting somewhere else, was kind of led to the broader ERIC conversation. So, but those are all kind of the same ball of concerns, I think, that have historically been people concerned with the list. But your other comments are all extremely valid as well. And so we'll build in some of those talking points.
Yeah, the only thing that, and I see Mary Ellen has her hand up, but real quick, Mary Ellen, before I get to you, the only thing I would add is that Scott, what you talked about, physical security in terms of worker security and that kind of thing, there's another committee that's looked at that a lot more closely. This committee really has looked a lot at machines and internet and cyber. And that's why list maintenance is part of that, because that's done through, you know, internet and registration lists, that kind of thing. So the physical security of people, we talked a little bit about equipment, you know, ballot security, you know, chain of command for the paper ballots. But again, the election day processes committee is looking at that more closely, and they have some good ideas. And finally, in terms of recommendations, we're not going to focus on recommendations that cannot be implemented before November. You know, if we are talking about additional audits, we can get more specific after November. I think at this point, you can say we discussed it. We think they're great, that we do a good job now. We could do more. we're going to have more specifics, you know, in our final report or something like that. So I think that you're right. We don't want to confuse people as things are done now before November, but we can give a nod to things that will be in the final report that might be, you know, for future consideration, and things that the committee's discussed, because these are things the public wants to hear and has talked about as well. Now, Mary Ellen. You're looking for your mute. There you go.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, by this point, I'm not sure I can be coherent because I put my hand up right at the beginning of what Scott was covering, and I got involved with so many of those things. I'm not sure where I am right now. But in addition, I missed the May meeting, and I even, left a few minutes ago to go see if I'd forgotten to print my notes, but I have none. So I don't know if I missed an email, but I have nothing on what happened in May. And I'm just looking at this right now. In listening to you all, one of the things that I'm thinking when we're talking about the recommendation of increasing voter knowledge by increasing voter engagement or increasing our engagement with voters, I think that one of the sieves that we need to use for that is that certain things are more volatile when it comes to misinformation and disinformation than others. And the machines, the ballot security, as I work with 2 or 3 other groups that are working in this same field and are putting out information the same way. And those are the ones that because people know less about that, I think that it's easier to convince people or confuse people and create fear than things that they can check or that they actually understand themselves. So I think that when we're looking to be specific about recommendations, we really need to consider what is most easily distorted, because that's where my biggest concern is. I mean, with AI right now and what I'm looking at, what I'm seeing, it's like, oh my Lord, I can't imagine what we're going to deal with between now and November. I can't even envision how bad it could be. So I think we really need to think in terms of what is most ripe for the people who are inclined to go in that direction when we recommend, because I don't know how much we can do, how fast, but it is right scary.
Yep, I agree 100%. I think we're just now starting to see the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, so
In
it's
the last couple of weeks, it's changed for me. Maybe I wasn't noticing before, but it's changed now.
yeah.
I think that's a great point. What is the most confusing and scary to people right now? And you're right, AI and cyber stuff is at the top of the list. That is a really good point.
Well, people just don't understand that. I mean, I have a background in information, not the technical part, but I have an understanding. And as I'm interacting with people, the things that they're saying to me, I keep thinking, if you understood even the basics, you would know that what you're telling me simply can't happen. But they don't know the basis, especially people in my age group. They think they're pretty savvy, but they really don't know the basics. And therefore, it sounds logical, it sounds reasonable. I'm scared, and I'm going to make sure everyone I know is scared with me. That's kind of what I've been feeling in the last 2 or 3 weeks as I've been talking to people. I'm just amazed at the things they're coming up with. That, especially after listening to the head of the North Carolina cybersecurity and, things that if you work with this at all, no, that's not a possibility, but the average person doesn't know. And then when we're talking about trying to determine whether something has been changed by AI or something like that. I mean, the level of concentration and interest that you need, I can't imagine, first of all, how we can explain it to the public. And secondly, I can't imagine that people would be interested in spending that time. So it really is wild. And
So
I
I'm
wonder
just,
if we did for 2024. I mean, you know, this
I'm
is a
curious,
great time.
Mary Ellen, what are you hearing that when you hear, you know, she said that's not possible. Is it,
Okay.
when I see AI, I see people sort of misrepresenting what politicians are saying and doing, and it doesn't have much to do with the election process and infrastructure.
The
So
part that
I
I'm
see those as two
talking,
separate things. So
well, those are two separate things, but the part that has to do with the process and infrastructure is that they don't understand how we have the chain of command or the chain of possession or whatever it is, you know, the ballots. They don't understand that the machines are not connected to the internet. Although I say this, what I get back is, have you checked them? Do you know? And then when I say they are checked, but what about the hours between when they're checked and when they're used? I mean, it's that kind of, it's almost like an idiocy to me. I mean, and these are from educated, intelligent people. I just, I don't know where they're coming from. But
there is a whole aspect to all of this.
what was that, Scott?
There is a whack-a-mole aspect to trying to explain to people, because once you dismiss one concern, they raise another red herring kind of concern. And keep in mind, these are not original thoughts that these people are having. These are things that they've heard and they're repeating. They're things that frighten them, that concern them, and that they want to do something about, but they don't have the knowledge and understanding to come to draw their own conclusions. And I think that that's always one of the disappointments of a project like this, is all this good informative information is put together and compiled and presented out, but it goes over the head of the intended audience, because that they're responding and thinking and reacting on a visceral level, on a fear-based level, and not necessarily at the higher, more rational levels that your report is trying to invoke. So just keep that in mind. I think it's very easy to overestimate the understanding that your audience already has. I just had some discussions recently with folks that I thought were old enough to understand civics and American government, and they don't. And they confess that they've never taken a civics class and they're not even sure what civics is. And you know, people, the people who I think the commission is trying to reassure are people who are low information voters, we call them. And if you provide too much information or too high level of information, you're going to totally miss persuading or reassuring this audience. So to reassure these folks, it needs to be just very basic and things that you probably take for granted that people understand. Like this guy that I was talking to the other day was this big proponent of the Electoral College, but he couldn't explain the formula for why each state had as many votes as they did. So, you know, which
well,
is just
I'll point out,
kind
Scott,
of
that, you say not everybody's had a civics class. Some of us have had a civics class that was, close to 50 years ago. So,
Or 60 years
Go
ago.
further back
it's
than that.
not right there. The class isn't.
But there is a real disconnect. Yesterday, that now this doesn't really do with ballot security, but it is a clear example of the disconnect I'm talking about. I happened to see someone that I taught with years ago. He's a young man, probably in his mid-40s, and he is still in teaching. And we were talking about the changes that are happening in education, and I'm explaining where some of those changes are coming from. And he's like, well, now, which side is for that and which side is against that? And I am thinking to myself, good heavens, you're bright as can be. I worked with you. You're great. You're worried to death about this, and you do not know who is behind the changes in education in this state. I was flabbergasted. And I think that in any area, we get the same thing. These are not people, they're low information, but low information in certain specific areas. I mean, that's certainly not a low information person, but voting, and he's a math person actually. And I don't think that voting and the civic aspect of life is of interest. And it just, he's complaining about this, and he does not know how it's happening. And I think that's where we are in many cases. So I agree, Scott. I think we need to be very succinct, very clear, very simple in what we're trying to explain. But then again, I don't know how it could work. I'm more concerned than I've ever been. The last couple of weeks has been not good.
Yeah, no, I think people are reachable. And I think, as Scott mentioned, we're going for people in the middle who don't think about elections until October, right? They've got their own lives, they got kids to feed, they got work to get to. But they've heard stuff. And like I said, knowing that it's against the law to put a modem in a machine, like that's going to convince a lot of people. That would convince some people I know who are skeptics. And some of the basic things, we do have random audits. Every election we have audits. Every election we test machines. The public can come in and watch, the machine, put the names in and see they came out the same way. Oh my goodness, it actually worked. These are the kind of things, again, the simple concepts that we don't want to repeat misinformation. We don't want to repeat anything that is like a wacko perspective, but we want to reinsure and reinforce the way it's done and the things that we discovered that the average person doesn't know. Because until 2016, it wasn't a huge, big concern. I mean, I was on a ballot, I don't know how many times. I never thought about what happened to my ballot. I never thought about where it went and who counted it, and I just assumed it worked. So, yeah.
Good assumption, as it turns out.
And what happened, Scott?
I said it's a good assumption, as it turns out.
Yeah, that's right.
Steve and Jim, I'm thinking about the short conversation we had as everybody was coming on, and Mary Ellen's kind of broader concerns. And when we think about what our committee is best to report out with regards to artificial intelligence, there's the part of artificial intelligence that is a public concern because of like was it New Hampshire where the robocalls were spreading disinformation about polling places or something like that. So that's one aspect of how artificial intelligence is concerning. For our group, Steve, I think that I understand your we need to keep our focus here on cybersecurity specifically. In one of those CISA reports, the CISA findings said to the Elections Commission, we don't expect that artificial intelligence is going to bring about novel cybersecurity risks, but instead it is going to amplify the way in which we are impacted. And Steve, with your experience with network security, I think that speaks to the need for redundancy and parallel systems in our voting process, and also in the infrastructure that supports getting voting machines to where they need to go, and all of those other pieces that would have previously just been called denial of service campaigns. Now a denial of service campaign has the turbocharger of an artificial intelligence ability connected to it.
Actually, you just using the phrase denial of service just sort of triggered something else up here that we might consider putting in the report. I know that some of the people that we talked to mentioned these kind of emergency response kits, or kind of election in a box, how they can do things. There was somebody that talked about, when a hurricane was coming in, and keeping election capabilities in the Wilmington area. So, in a way, a hurricane is a kind of a natural denial of service, right? And so, the kinds of things that we have to maintain our election capability in the presence of either, hostile actors or hostile nature, I think that's something that could go into the report.
And your election officials at each county have contingency plans for how they will deal with those types of things. They've already thought this through. They've already war gamed it. The big issue is being resourced to be able to respond when this kind of thing happens. But you can rest assured that these things have already been, thought through. I held an election during the wildfire when multiple communities were evacuated, and we just moved voting to evacuation centers. So that's an extreme example. But Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey and New York in 2012, all those election officials were able to respond along with their localities to those things. So encouraging those things to happen, encouraging legislators, county commissioners, supervisors, whatever they are, the appropriators to fund those things, I think is important. But there's another topic that's getting a lot of currency across a number of states right now, and that's this notion of paper ballots. And people are talking about paper ballots, and really what they're saying is, I think that they want paper ballots to be counted by hand, which is good as an audit. It's impractical as a normal way of doing business. But the whole transition to paper ballots that North Carolina made not too long ago was for security. That is the ultimate security device. That is the ultimate redundancy. That is the ultimate anti-hacking countermeasure, is having paper ballots. Because if there's ever any doubt, those paper ballots can be pulled out, counted, audited, and people can have confidence outside of assurances of an electronic-based system that their system was intact and that the results are accurate. So again, I think that kind of falls into this basic knowledge that we assume that people have, that when we have paper ballots, because we have paper ballots and not DREs anymore, that means that if there's ever any question, those ballots can be pulled out and counted by hand and verified and compared to the electronic results. Now, part of the challenge is having the laws that will support that and make it easier to do that without, creating a lot of drama. I know here in Virginia, that's kind of a challenge. But don't forget that paper ballots are that ultimate silver bullet in terms of cybersecurity. Okay? Those are hand marked by the voter, irrefutable record of the voter's intent.
You say getting that legally is touchy, or I forget the phrase you used, but I'll point out that we have that in North Carolina, and that's actually cited in the report, the North Carolina law that requires that every vote come from a paper ballot, whether marked by hand or machine. We use BMPs.
Right, but if you lock them up at the clerk of the court's office, like we do here in Virginia, and you have to get a court order to get them out to audit them, that it doesn't, kind of defeats the purpose. So, but anyway, the whole purpose of those paper ballots, and personally, I think you should reiterate that we have them, and the reason we have them is because they're the best countermeasure against all threats to the integrity of our election, is that we have that permanent record of the voter's intent, and we can go back and refer to it without electronic devices.
So surely if you have a statewide, machine recount followed by a statewide hand recount, that everyone will trust and believe the results, right? We saw that before.
Well, there's always losers, and their fans always have a hard time losing, regardless how the ballots are counted. And I say that having dealt with losers in every election for over a period of 30 years. Somebody's heart is always broken on election night.
I have to get a quick call from Nathan. I'll be right back.
All right, James, where do we go from here?
Well, I think we got some pretty good feedback, and really over the next couple of weeks, going to go in and kind of edit around the margins, kind of what we have, add in some points, but really the help would be for other people to kind of go in and look at the work that's in there. But bottom line is where we're at in about 2 weeks is what's going to go in as our initial draft. I mean, I think we're in a good place today, but we'll tidy it up for the next couple of weeks. And then from that draft, we'll start crafting our kind of PowerPoint summarized version. And we'll make sure before the 15th, before we submit that we kind of push that out to the team just so people know they can come review that, see what's on it. I'm not sure how many people are going to make it to Salisbury, but I think there's also a virtual option. But it'll be good for at least our team to know what our slides are going to say before we go final. So we'll make sure to push those out before they get approved for the final release.
Okay. Very good.
I have a thought that states the obvious for sure, but I think particularly for this committee, as it's reported out, the importance of the report and the slides being as clear voice as possible. My Intel officer friend, how important it is to make sure that the audience understands what you're talking about. But I think, like Mary Ellen talked about, like Scott has reminded us, this is some people's eyes start to glaze over as soon as the consonant cyber come out of somebody's mouth, and so making it as accessible as possible without dumbing it down, I think, is super important, and something that just in your skeleton notes already, well, more than skeleton notes, I think you and Steve are doing a great job of that, but keep that as a beacon as you continue to flesh it out.
That's a great.
And make sure we keep pushing the overall theme that we do a great job in North Carolina, even if we have other suggestions to make.
Yep. Yeah. Good to better.
Good to better. Wasn't there a book, Good to Great, or something
Good
like
to great.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you need help with slides, we have an intern, that could help. If you want to just put words on it and then have somebody make it look better, we can help with that.
Okay. Great. PowerPoint interns. Okay. Well, I think we hit our agenda that we want to cover, Steve, unless you have any other points or Jennifer, but I think we've hit the point and we're 5 minutes early.
Well, Steve and James, I want to tell you all, I think you did a great job. I mean, I feel like I missed the whole last piece, but it came out really well. I think I like looking at it.
Still a work in progress. So again, this is a draft, so this will mature, and people have good ideas. Please keep sending them.
Oh, and one last thing, Scott's comments about, we know people don't trust technology. We don't need the data. if we're gonna have the data, we should put it in there because people want to see it's current, they want to see it's North Carolina, and they want to hear what is on people's minds this fall. So,
Well-
yes, we know people are scared of machines, but we're gonna try to put some data in there too.
I'm very interested in seeing how that sentiment has changed over the years too, personally. I
Yeah.
mean, you talked about a 2022. I think some people pushed a narrative that was so kind of extreme and absurd for a while that I think some of that lost credibility um, as it should have.
Yep.
But there were certain people and certain organizations that were pushing things that have been clearly disproved, I guess, that I think people are shifting to other conspiracy theories. But I would like to see what people say in those polls to see how that sentiment has changed. So I don't think we're talking about Hugo Chavez, programming machines anymore. I hope.
Super. More to come.
Great. Okay. Well, hope everybody has a good rest of the week.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Yep.